Good morning. As you know, I'm Pam Edwards, and I teach with the Martha S. Persons Sunday school class. They've been mighty kind to me. They seem to renew my contract. Welcome to each of you, whether you're with us in person or via technology. Today's lesson is about Jesus and the way he handled the Last Supper with his disciples. This will be covered through the Gospel of John, 13th chapter, verses 1 through 15, and verses 34-35. We need to visit John himself to obtain a true feel of his writings, and especially concerning the Last Supper. A little footnote. The book of John is the fourth book in the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. To find his next book, one must skip over 18 more books in the New Testament, and then you will see his writings of 1 John, 2 John, 3 John. Again, we skip the book of Jude, and you will come to the book of Revelations. Revelations is the last book in the New Testament, and John was the author. These 5 books were not written in the order that they appear in the Bible. In fact, the first of the 5, the one we're covering today, it was written very few years before he died. Now, John was close to being 100 years old when he died. I have decided that John had good, strong genes. Just look at the length of life most people of that era experienced. If you got to be in the 40s, that's a lengthy life back then. But John almost doubled that, and did double it. We tend to believe in the power of love according to the love you experienced as a child and as an older person. Love is continuous in your life. If you're not experiencing love at all ages, you really are denying yourself of a wonderful facet of living. Well, John experienced love. His mother was a follower of Christ. She exposed her son, John, to the same love of Christ that she felt. Now, in 2020, we would love to think that religion really did that for so many people, created that sense of love. John was the youngest of the disciples, known as the most Christ-like apostle, the only disciple at the cross. I've always been fascinated by that fact. I mean, John ought to have known if there were any other disciples there. And from this cross, Jesus bestowed on John the privilege and responsibility to care for his mother, Mary. Notice that Jesus loved his mother and asked John to care for his mother. Also, one can easily see that Jesus would have had many opportunities to observe how well John really did care for his own mother. If he cares for his own mother well, then he will care for Mary. And he did. Lastly, John is known as the disciple whom Jesus loved. What an attribute. What more could you ask for? Yes, John was the primary source of Jesus and his depth of love. It is so important in reading and in learning when you have a primary source. We are all accepted into God's love as we are, flaws and all. I love that phrase because I probably could list a few flaws. However, keep in mind that God's love is a great motivator for change. So, if you go to God with your flaws and all, expect some good changes because God can work he can handle any situation. Let's move into the Last Supper. It is important to cover the few days before the Last Supper and the celebration of the Passover. Now, keep this in mind. On that particular weekend that Jesus is there, and there's going to be this Passover festival, you've got to realize that for 1,000 years before, every year, the Jewish believers would make the trip to Jerusalem in behalf of the celebration of Passover. I would absolutely call that devotion. This celebration commemorated the deliverance from Egyptian bondage. This was an annual festival centered on the final plague of Egypt, put on Egypt, when the firstborn Egyptians always died. The Israelites were spared because of the lamb's blood smeared on the door of their homes. The angel of death visited the Egyptian homes and killed the firstborn. But with Jewish homes and the lamb of blood on their doors, the lamb's blood on their doors, the angel, under God's command, passed over. Now notice how I said the word passed over, because as time progresses, passed over changes to pass over. Let's talk about those very important few days before this Passover begins. And Passover began on a Friday. 5 days prior to this festival, on Sunday, Jesus walks into Jerusalem, Palm Sunday, the triumphal entry. He had so many followers. Keep that in mind as we go through this era. On Monday, Jesus and his fellow Jewish followers confronted the money changers at the Jewish temple. That didn't go too well. On Tuesday and Wednesday, Jesus could see that the people in power were very apprehensive about the number of followers that Jesus had. Did these power holders really want to replace the monarchy? Did they want to replace the military system? Whether you like the military system or not, they had a fine-tuned one. And are they willing to release anything to the Jewish segment of their population? Different way to look at it. The Roman Empire was divided into geographical sections. With each section came a ruler and a military force to keep control in that geographical section. And of course, you still had the monarchy back in Rome, the king and so forth. Now, so they had these military forces in every geographical section. It was a system of oppression. No doubt about it. Jesus could see that the crucifixion, the resurrection, and any appearances that he would make thereafter were getting closer and closer. John writes that on Thursday, the day before the Passover festival began on Friday, that Jesus saw the need to meet the disciples with a Last Supper. Now, I want to tell you that the other Gospels tend to make the Last Supper appear to have been on Friday. Don't ask me why, but I trust John, he was there. They had to understand, the disciples had to understand what was going to happen to Jesus, what was going to happen to all of their followers. And not just the ones in the city of Jerusalem, but all over. Jesus felt a responsibility to God to give support and guidance to his disciples. Now, he in no way had lost his power. He knew he could handle all this. I would like to read verses 4 and 5 from the 13th chapter of John. He riseth from supper and laid aside his garments and took a towel and girded himself. After that, he poureth water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, to wipe them with the towel which he was girded. So they had this wasn't something new. They always did this because think about what the footwear was for people back then. It was sandals or it was no shoes. So if you went to anything, they always had a lowly servant. That was not considered and it always strikes me odd. The human race seems to have a hierarchy for everything. And they decided on the hierarchy list exactly where foot washing comes. As one commentator expressed it, washing feet was a grimy job. So that's why they had the lowly servant to do it. So Jesus comes along. All of a sudden, he's tying this long cloth around his waist. He's got a pan, or basin, they called it, a pan that is large enough to soak feet in. Maybe the servant that came along replaced the water, I hope. And his long towel, with his long towel, he moved through the room, cleansing the feet of the disciples. And then he came to Simon Peter. I'm going to paraphrase Simon Peter. Peter looked straight at Jesus and basically said, I know and I recognize you as the leader of this group. So I can tell you, you are not ever cleaning my feet. If you were a leader, you were much higher on the hierarchy. I'm telling you, hierarchy has played unbelievable parts in history. He ended his little conversation, or dissertation, I should say, toward Jesus. He said, I can care for myself. Jesus' reply is short and to the point. Now just listen to the way Jesus worded this. If I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me. Now that's serious business. He's telling one of his disciples, that things are not going to be good in the future. Jesus connected foot washing to the mission of cleansing souls. And you say, well, that's kind of a far stretch. Well, it's withstood the time of many, many years. Are we ready for the cleansing of spiritual feet? That's another way to look at it. Jesus commanded his disciples to live and preach the Christian principles and to be servants of one another, to serve and love those whom they come in contact with through meeting them or preaching to them. Jesus just says, this is what it's going to be. Let me read the verse 34 and 35. A new commandment I give unto you, that ye shall love one another as I have loved you, and that ye also love one another. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, and if ye have love one to another. Now, here we're getting into some serious things. You've got disciples who have been following around Jesus and believing in him, and all of a sudden he's talking about after some major things happen. He's talking about how these disciples will continue to relate to the very, very important public. Jesus is pointing out that his own example of service is the best way to understand love. Remember, Jesus is also portrayed again in the book of John, which was not cited in the lesson, but I'm going to bring it in. Chapter 3, verse 16, 17. For God loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. Yes, I think it all connects together. I really do. Remember what was said earlier in the lesson? We're all accepted into God's love as we are, flaws and all. I would imagine that on some days of the week, the flaw list is a little longer than on other days, but that's the best you can do. However, keep in mind that God's love is still a great motivator for change. So if you go to God and you try to explain your list of flaws, God's going to do the maybe even work miracles. You just don't know. But he is there to support you always. Now, near the end of the Last Supper, John tells us that Jesus had some farewell words. Well, you know, he's running the show, so he should have some farewell words. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one cometh to the Father but by me. Yes, that is exactly what he said. I am in God the Father, and the Father in me. So he says, you know, you get a package deal here. Don't even think you can separate it. You get a package deal. You've always heard me say Sunday school is for Monday through Saturday. Connect with God the Father. Be an example of love and service for others. And that service doesn't mean you have to join some group that's doing some magnanimous project. Good heavens. You know, some of those projects get bigger and bigger and bigger. But you can just do something on your own. It doesn't take much planning to serve someone else. It only takes your connection through Jesus to God. Remember, your best plans may be somewhat flawed, but God will accept your flaws. And you can plan again to love and serve someone with lesser flaws. God always will bless your efforts. Thank goodness for that. You know, the lesson title is just perfect this time. Sometimes I think they have the weirdest titles in the world and I want to change them. It says serving love. And that's exactly what it's about. Let me tell you a little personal note, which I think some of you all have heard me say, so just bear with it. I was sitting at a meeting, and we were waiting for the chairman to put the gavel down so that we could get on with the meeting and move on. And someone that was sitting up there said, Ms. Evers, are you ready for Thanksgiving? And I said, well, yeah, I guess I'd better be, because I've had phone calls from each of the children. At that time, they were both in college. I said, I've received phone calls from each of my children, and they've given me a list of items they certainly hope are on the menu. And they chuckled. And then one of the members said, what did you just say? And I said, yeah, my children have called home. They've got their favorite things they want for the Thanksgiving dinner. He says, you're kidding. I said, no. And he seemed to go on and on about it. He says, I just can't believe it. And I decided to put an end to it. And I just conveniently turned to him and said, you know, if having them to call home with requests for certain menu items is the only catalyst they need to give them the little shove to come home for Thanksgiving, because you know when you're in college, believe me, I taught college kids, they don't always click on every inch of common sense. And I was just so happy that I knew for sure that all of them were coming home. And I said, if that's the only catalyst that is needed for our children to come home, I will cook until I drop. He didn't say anything more to me. So, from the hymn, I am thine, O Lord, draw me nearer, nearer, blessed Lord, to the cross where thou hast died. Draw me nearer, 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 blessed Lord, to thy precious bleeding side. And then I love this one from the I Love to Tell the Story. Another hymn. I love to tell the story, for some have never heard the message. The message of salvation from God's only holy word. I love to tell the story. 'Twill be my theme in glory to tell the old, old story of Jesus and his love. And that's what Jesus was saying to the disciples. You're going to have to get out there and give that message. And I'm going to close with one thing that if you are under 50, you may not relate to this too much because you're too young, but I like this. Katharine Hepburn was an absolutely marvelous actress, had an aura around her that just nobody else could touch. And I want to read what she wrote. She said, I think we're finally at the point where we've learned to see death with a sense of humor. I have to. When you're my age, and she did live very, very lengthy life. When you're my age, it's as if you're a car. First, the tires blow, and you get that fixed. Well, we have all kinds of little replacements for knees and hips and all that kind of stuff. Then the headlights go, and your vision isn't as good as it used to be, and you get that fixed. And then one day, you drive into a shop, a repair shop, and the man says, sorry, miss, they don't have this make of replacement anymore. So with all our flaws and the need for new parts, we turn to the best example of help, Jesus and God the Father. Y'all have a wonderful week. All right.
Gracious Heavenly Father, we do thank you for this time of sharing and learning. We ask that you guide us by your Holy Spirit so that as we seek to serve you, we will do all for your honor and your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.
You're welcome.